Frank. We will see
Thank
you
you.
guys back in about an hour for part 2 of that workshop, and I will turn it now over to Coulter and Grace for map.
Podcast. He really should.
I agree.
Great banter between them. So, all right. So hopefully we all came up with some questions as we started going through. Before we start those, I was going back through all the chats and saw there were some comments in here. I saw that Nicole, who actually, this is Nicole's, this is some of Nicole's data. She was informing me that they don't have interns. How are they going to clean this data up? Well, it turns out, Nicole, because we're actually doing that process, we're actually cleaning it up before we go and give you that back. We're going to be doing that. So don't worry about that. We'll take care of you on that. And that's sort of the reasons why you sometimes want to go and let somebody else go and do this for you. Let them go through and process it for you so you don't have any issues with that. So what other comments do we have, or what other questions do we have in here? Do we have any other questions that we want to talk about? I can see that we actually reduced in size. There aren't quite as many people in here right now, so this may be a little bit more intimate. Again, please turn on your webcams. By the way, I thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Jeremiah, for both of you. I'm actually talking right at both of you, only because I just want to make sure that we all feel like we're in the same room. And thank you, Michelle, also for keeping yours on most of this time. I appreciate it. No questions? Any questions? There being none, let's move into this, and let's start getting into this a little bit more. All right. I mentioned that one of the issues that we had was that while what we're seeing here, what we did this morning, it's an official parcel fabric, but it struggles because it's not set up for us when you want to go and use it. There's been very minor configurations in here. And some of these may look trivial, but if you're editing this 6-8 hours a day, it makes a difference for you. For example, on the parcel fabric lines, the parcel polygon lines in here, this is the current configuration as it comes right out of here. Well, the reality is maybe we want to go and make sure that this is set up correctly and make it easier so that we go and do an identify, we see where something is, and it highlights those things that are important for us. So for example, we don't need our object ID. That's not an important one. We might go and take the global ID and move it all the way down to the bottom. We might take the shape field, move that down to the bottom. We might take the created by and retired by records. These are records that we really don't interact with, and move them down to the bottom and make them sort of just make them read only. We don't need to see them. So what is it that we are going to see? We want to see what the bearing is, what the direction is, what the distance is, what the radius is, what the arc length is. Radius 2 field. Radius 2 field has to do with spirals, and it has to do with sort of more complex curves. You can go and put that in. The Kogo type. So by the way, I'm over in the highlighting field here and just telling you which ones I wanted to show in yellow. Ground to grid, rotation, scale. Yeah, we might as well put these in. The parent line ID, it turns out we really don't use that, so I'm going to turn that off. Then I'm going to make sure that I highlight both my created by and used by, and just do this. Real simple, taking that feature class so that now if I do an identify or a select on here, and I go over here to just select My parcel line, again, these don't have any sort of COGO values calculated on, but it shows me, here's what I want to see. I want to see what's the bearing, what's the distance, what's the radius, what's the arc length on this? When was this created? When was it not created on here? The rest of this is just sort of superfluous. I don't need to see it. One of the first things you want to go and do. I'm going to go and do the same thing, but this time it's with the polygon feature class, the parcel polygon feature class. Again, I don't need to see the object ID. That's not important for me. And to be quite honest, it never really gets used. The object ID or the global ID, I can move all the way down to the bottom. I don't care about that much. It's not something that's important to me. The shape field, I can move down to the bottom also. The name field, this is one of those dirty little secrets. There's always a name field inside of here, but the reality is it doesn't get used anywhere other than tasks. So let's go and keep the name field, keep it turned on. The created by and the recorded by fields, these are read-only. They should be read-only. You can't go and make any changes in them. Let's go and move those down a little bit. Stated area. Let's go over to the stated area field. And there we go. And instead of being 6 decimal places long, let's make it 2 decimal places. Let's show the thousands and pad it with zeros and modify that as far as how it's displayed back to us. Now, this is an interesting concept because within not just the Parcel Fabric, but within ArcGIS Pro, COGO lines are actually numeric lines, and you want to just make sure that they're configured. It's sort of like Excel. You can take any numeric field and format it however you want. So for example, maybe the calculated acreage field, you can go and make that calculated area, make that 2 decimal places with thousands and padding, and let's put a suffix on there. Maybe we're all going to calculate these as acreage and put it there. But when I said these are like in Excel, it's exactly like this. The formatting of that cell, the formatting of those values. You can format this as a number, a percentage, a currency, a rate being something that's divided by something else, a fraction, scientific, direction, angle, custom. You can format it as any of those on here. And in this case, I can just say, yeah, let's put that as a number in there. Misclosure ratio. Misclosure ratio really only concerns meets and bounds parcels. So maybe I want to see it, maybe I don't. Let's go ahead and highlight that. Whether it's a seed or not, I don't care about that. But I do have these other attribute fields that really are ones that I want to go and always use. So I'm going to go and take and select those, and I'm going to move them. Come on, all the way up here, and I'm going to put them on top of, just underneath my name, the name field. I'm going to highlight them all of them. So this way it makes it more logical for me, makes it easier for me to understand what's going on with this on here. I'm going to save this configuration. When I go and open up my attribute table now, it goes and it's easier for me to see what these things look like, sees what fields I'm actually going to be paying attention to and what's going to be in there. And when I do an explore on here, when it pops up is it will pop up. In this case, I'm looking at this. I haven't set this yet. Sorry. When I do a select, it will actually use those settings in here and highlight them for me. So I can quickly, my eye is drawn to those highlighted attribute fields. And I want to make sure that I know what's in them. I know that it's configured correctly on there. All right, so something like that, you want to make sure that you configure. We talked about this earlier, where one of the issues is that inside of here, everything is marked COGO. All of the polygons are called parcels. The subdivisions are called parcels and COGO on here. We've got to go and make sure that we update those, that we make them more logical in what they say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in my table of contents and call these parcel lines. All right, maybe I'll go in and make these parcel polygons, describe a little bit better what these things are. Go down here and I'll call these subdivision lines. I'll spell them correctly though. Subdivision lines. And then on here, I'll make this subdivision polygons. The reason why I make the changes inside the table of contents is because the feature templates, what you use to create these things, are driven from the table of contents. So if I go over here to create these elements, let me go back here and turn on my editing again to see those turned on. So again, you can see that this was my original subdivision polygons, and it still says parcels on it. So what I want to do is I want to go in here and I want to go and manage that. So I'm going to click on this and say manage these templates. And again, the templates are how these things are going to be displayed. So I'm going to go to my subdivision polygons here and it says parcel. I'm going to delete that, and then I'm going to go and say create one for what's shown in my table of contents, so that now what I see in my create, what I'm using for my create feature template, matches what's over here in my table of contents. I'm going to do the same thing for the subdivision lines. By default, coming out of the box, it says parcel lines. I don't want that. I want to delete that, and I want to have it create one according to what it says over here. Going to go back through. These are historic. I don't have a template there. This one said parcel. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to make these, in fact, parcel polygons on here. And the parcel lines, those are actually being created now correctly. Another thing you want to look for inside of these, and again, the template, the feature templates, and this is since ArcMap 10, the feature templates define what attribution gets automatically populated when you're creating things. It also defines what tools you have available to you and such. So I'm going to look at my parcel lines here and go to properties and look at the tools that are in here to see what tools are available to me. I probably am not going to use a right angle line tool. I will use just a regular line tool, probably there. Radial, probably not. I won't use a circle tool. I will use a trace tool, and I'll use this. I might actually use a streaming tool also on here. The other question is this 2-point line. Let's go and do this. Let's show you this. That's fine. Let's close this out. 2-point line. Inside of a 2-point line here, by default, it keeps rubber banding off of the previous point that you input. And this works fine when you're just doing a regular sort of traverse. However, what happens when I'm going and I want to snap between two, and now I've got to go and stop, then I've got to go back here and go to here and here and stop there. There's a setting inside of ArcGIS Pro that says, and I'm in my templates now, I can go over here And I can go to my line and say whether I want to continue my 2-point lines or not. Right now, if I turn this off, it's a temporary fix. If I go to my template and change it, that's sort of a permanent fix. And I have to input the beginning and end point of every 2-point line. Doesn't make a big difference, but it's something that you want to sort of think about how you set this up, because this actually helps you or hinders you while you are editing. You want to sort of understand how you're going to configure the tools to be useful for you. How do you work with these? Again, you want to configure the attributes so that when you select on a parcel and you go to attributes, what is it displaying for them? How does it display them? What is it calculating in here? All of that. Things like the stated area. I said sometimes in some counties, if it's more than an acre, they want to show acres on here. If it's less than an acre, they want to show square feet. Let's assume for this, we're just going to do acreage every single time. So what we're going to do to make it easier for us is automatically tell it that every time something gets created, that this stated area unit field actually automatically fills in acres on it. That's the default value for it. But more importantly, I want to say, make it read only. I got to go back here. I got to discard those edits. No, let's save those edits. Then go back here and save this out. By the way, tell me if I'm going too fast, or if you want me to slow down and explain a little bit more things on here. Please, you've got me for a couple hours yet. You know, I will steamroll over anybody. I'll just keep going and going and going. Make sure that this is worthwhile, that these hours, you're not wasting them. All right, let me go back here. Let's go to here. Let's create a parcel. When I create this parcel and go to my attributes, I now see that the stated area units are automatically populated as acreage on here. Well, how do I calculate the acreage on this? Well, I can go in here and on my parcels, open up the attribute field, and I can go in here and I could say on the calculated acreage field, let's go ahead and calculate this field. And let's use Arcade. I like Arcade. And with Arcade is an object-oriented scripting language. So with that object-oriented scripted language, for example, there's a global variable called feature. All right, spell it right, Frank. Feature. That means that when you're evaluating this expression, always go to each individual feature as you're going through there. It turns out that there's also a function that says return the area of that feature. But I have to tell it as part of that area function what type of value I want. Do I want it to be as acres? What do I want this to be? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and tell it I want it to be acres. And I'm going to close this parens. So this expression will go and for every single feature, and I've only got one selected right now, but for every single feature, calculate the area and return the value of acres on there. I can hit this. It went and did the one that I had selected. Let's go over here and see. Sure enough, there it is. And since I had set my field setting to be 2 decimal places and to have a suffix at the end of it of AC, it automatically goes and configures this so that now if I go and clear this out and calculate this for all of my parcels, it will go and calculate this for me. Again, there's a lot of little tiny configurations that are, they may seem trivial, but when you're in here and you're editing in this and you're doing this a lot, you want the software as much as possible to work for you versus you working for the software. The stated area, this is much the same thing. In this case, because with this data set, we don't have a separate deeded acreage. So I'm going to calculate that field to the same thing, to stated area. And I'm going to calculate that to the acres in here and let it go and calculate that.
How many records are actually in that file you're working with right now?
I'm going to check.
No, that generic 2000, but then usually that updates to some. Okay.
11,800. So I didn't want to do the whole county. Well, it took long enough to go, for example, to do things like build Parcel Fabric. But, you know, this is 11,000, 12,000 acres or 12,000 parcels that we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this stated area unit, that's the one that we said we want to go and make it acreage. But if you recall, if we go over here to the data designer, to the fields, and when we look here in the stated area, if we recall, this domain actually has these weird codes in here. So it turns out that the code we want is 109.402. Since this is read-only, I wonder if it will let me go and do this. I'll just use Arcade again. 109.402. Let me go and do that. I can't change it once it's in there. Again, the reason why we tend to go in and configure it this way is as we're going in here and attributing a parcel, as we're attributing a parcel, one of the things that often happens is you'll have to go in here and maybe put this value in. And when you do this, it automatically pops up another dropdown for this domain that you really don't want to have to go and populate each time. All right. Now we got that working correctly. But we don't have it set up to automatically calculate it. Let's go and introduce this concept of an attribute rule on here. All right. Let me go and take this and delete this, by the way. All right. On an attribute rule, I want to go to Design Attribute Rules. So an attribute rule is probably as close to the existing attribute assistant as you can get inside here. The difference is that attribute rules are stored not in a configuration table that's attached to a map document, attribute rules are actually as part of and stored in the geodatabase. So whether this is a file geodatabase or whether this is web services, you always have these attribute rules that will fire off. So if you've got a parcel fabric, and matter of fact, if you've got any sort of a feature class that you're serving out using services, and you have an attribute associated with it, that attribute rule will automatically go in and fire off. Those services can be consumed by ArcGIS Pro. They can be consumed by web maps. They can be consumed by an HTML editing app. They can be consumed by many different things. And the attribute rule will still go and fire off. They'll still be there. And we have three different, let me go and save these changes before I do anything else. We have three different types of attribute rules. We have a calculation rule. Calculation rule, when we go in and do this, it will automatically calculate something. So for example, we set that attribute table, that parcel fabric attribute table, that parcel polygon attribute table, that it automatically would set the acreage as the stated area unit as acres. We could have also done that here, so that anytime anything changes, it automatically goes and does that. I'm not going to do that here, but what I am going to do is say, let's automatically go and every time something gets created, calculate the calculated acreage field. So we'll call this calculated areas. All right. And we can put a in here. There's not a subtype. There's just all the feature classes. And we're going to calculate the stated area field. And this is in fact arcade again. And this is, if I remember correctly, the area function against the feature. And we want it to return acres here. It's validated, it's valid. All right, so every time I'm going to use a trigger and say every time we get a polygon created or every time we get a polygon updated, automatically calculate this field. All right, and let's go ahead and save that into the geodatabase. So the rules, they apply specifically to the feature class or the feature service. So this rule only goes with the parcel polygons. So now when I go in here and I go in here and I create a parcel polygon. Oh, I'm wrong tool, Frank. When I create that parcel polygon, it automatically calculates the stated area here for me. Automatically calculates it. No need to change it. If I go in here and I right click and don't have that selected, I right click and I say edit the vertices and change the location of this, basically I do an update on here. When I do the update, it automatically updated the acreage on here. So every time I make a change to this, it evaluates whether or not that trigger is going to fire. Now, this is not a parcel in the traditional type of thinking about this. This is purely a polygon. So these attribute rules fire off against feature classes. Whether or not the parcel fabric is going to evaluate it later, it still fires off of feature classes. So this will go and allow us to go and automatically, every time we calculate this, every time we update this in any way, put a new parcel polygon in there, or put a new, or change the location of that polygon or do a modification to it of some sort, it will automatically calculate this area. Well, that's good, except there were other rules in here. For example, that was the calculated area. But in addition to that, I took that value and moved it over to the stated area. So let's add a rule in here that says copy the acreage. All right, again, we can take this, copy it, put it in the description, and say, now let's take the stated area and just copy the value that's in the calculated acreage. Again, $ feature means for every object, take the value that's stored in the calculated area attribute field. Good. And do it every time we create something or anytime we update something. So we've now got an attribute rule that gets fired off twice. Once to go and initially calculate the acreage, and then a second time to go and calculate or to copy that acreage and put it into another field. All right, so let's go and do this again. Again, this is 3.14. Let's go and change this again so that we can fire off that trigger. And now when we fire off that trigger, not only does it calculate it here, but it also copies it over to here. So we now have a way to automatically calculate the acreage, automatically go and copy it to make sure that those fields are calculated correctly on here. So let's play around with this a little bit. Let's say that maybe these are two separate fields. The name field is supposed to be that pin value without dashes. And the pin field is supposed to be the value with the dashes. Let's play around with this. All right, let's see if there's something that we can do with attribute fields to help us with this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open my attribute table and set them up correctly. The name field, that's no dashes. So I'm going to go in here and calculate this. Again, I'm going to try to get you to use Arcade as much as possible. And I'm going to say, replace inside the name field, $ feature, the name value that's in there, and replace the dashes with nothing on here. So replace out of each of these objects the value in the name field and evaluate it to see if there's a dash in there. If there is a dash, replace that with nothing. You know, just don't put anything in there. And so go ahead and do this. So we want to, when we're thinking about this and thinking about how we set up our data, we need to know our data. We need to know what these values are supposed to look like, how they're supposed to be input and such. All right, so now we've got that in place. So I know what it's supposed to look like. Let's go and think about how can we set up an attribute rule to do that same thing for us. So let's add another rule. Remove dashes from pin. By the way, the description does not have to be filled in. So let's take this name field and say, remove from, in this case, let's remove it from the pin field, dash, and replace it with nothing on here. This is not remove, this is replace. Replace out of each of these objects, the dash out of the pin field and replace it with that. Make sure it's valid, good. So every time I insert it, every time I update it, it goes and runs. And again, on this, I'm demonstrating some of these techniques that are often used for setting up these parcel fabrics to make them easier to go and use. Some of these are applicable to you, some of these are not applicable to you. It just depends upon what you're doing. The other thing I'm doing now, well, I'm thinking, well, if I'm going to copy the value out of that pin field and put it into the name field, maybe I should make that name field read only so nobody can go and input something in there as I'm doing this. All right, maybe I want to go in and turn the highlighting off to signify to my user that you can't put anything in here, or you shouldn't put anything in here. Let's go back here now and create a polygon. There's our polygon. When I go to my attributes now, I can see that the name field is blank. When I type something in here now, all right, as soon as I hit enter there, it automatically goes and updates it on into the name field. So I can, if I understand the business rules, if I understand how the data is set up, if I understand how the parcel fabric is set up, I can automatically go and have all of these things populate themselves, minimizing the ability for mappers to go and input incorrect values in there. I can do that. By the way, it also went and calculated at the same time the acreage. It also calculated and set the default for the acre unit in my stated area, and it calculated the calculated acreage for me. So again, just so to watch this, if I go in here and edit this in any way, if I go and edit the vertices, it will take those area fields and modify them. If I go in here and take and modify in any way this field, it also recalculates the name on it. So this allows me to go and set up the data structure so that it automates a lot of the data entry that's in here. There should be some questions here. Are there any questions on here? We're going to start digging deeper now. No questions? All right. So this is good. This is sort of a traditional type of thing. Well, what happens? What happens while we're here? And I have a municipality field here. I'm going to, for these purposes, I'm going to assume that it really is for subdivisions. It's not for municipalities. All right. And I'm going to say, well, one of the things that you always have to do is if you are creating a parcel inside of a subdivision, to make sure that you capture the attributes for what subdivision is located in. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and let's turn these off. We're going to go and say, let's do a bit of calculation here. Let's go and see if we can go and calc sub name so that we do an intersect. On here. So we're going to intersect that and put it into the municipality field. All right. Now we are using Arcade again. I'm going to do a little bit of cheating. All right. In that I've already got an Arcade script that allows me to go and do this. I don't want to have to retype it each time, but I'm going to explain what this thing is. What we're going to do is we're going to set up so that we understand the relationship between the two layers that we're going to go in and evaluate. And this is, we're going to define that other layer by this feature set by name. All right, so let's look at what the, and I guess I should have done this beforehand, but I didn't. Let's get out of here. Let's go to this Parcel Fabric layer. Let's see, what is the real name of this Parcel Fabric? And it's actually subdivisions_PF. Let's go in here again. Let's pull this in. Here it is. So it turns out that we want to go and intersect subdivisions_PF. So Arcade, we're setting up an expression. We're setting up a variable for creating a buffer around everything that we're going to intersect. In this case, I just, I want to get as close as possible to the shape of that individual polygon we're doing. We're going to tell it to intersect that layer using the intersect function of the feature set by name. It's located in our data store, which is one of the globals here. It's called subdivisions_PF, and we're going to intersect it using the buffer of 0.001. And what it's going to do is it's going to give us a count of how many times this intersect happened. It's going to first initialize this variable. Then it's going to start, okay, if it's 0. If we are not inside of a subdivision, let's go and tell it to just input a value of no sub. Yeah, no sub. If, however, it is inside of a subdivision, for each one of those, just evaluate it and then go and put, and it's not parcel ID. Let's tell it to go and take the name value and put that into a variable called attribute value into the expression and return that. All right. It's going to calc sub. It's going to store it into MUN. It's going to fire off every time we create a polygon or every time we update a polygon. Since we can't save this, it means we have some edits over here still. Let's go and save those edits. Let's go back here and save this attribute rule. So the question is, do we have to use, I know that may have been, for many of you, that may have been the first time you saw that Arcade expression or that sort of function. We could do that a couple of different ways. We could do it as a buffer. We could do it as the centroid of that polygon in here and intersect the centroids. We're using buffers only because we tend to have better luck with that. So now let's try this. If I go back over here and I create a polygon, and I create the polygon over here. All right. When I go to the attributes, all right, it says, here's they are. There's nothing here. It didn't fill that in. If I go and create a polygon here, do I have the name here? What is this? Do I have this correctly set? The name on here should be the name field. Oh, sorry. That's a number field. Trying to go put that into a number field. Let's go create let's discard those. Let's go back here and create a new field. called a subdivision field on here. Good. That's what happens when I don't look at the data before I start doing demos. And I'm going to go move that up here. And I'm going to highlight it. So an interesting thing about this data designer, you actually have the ability to do two different things. You can work on the parcels PF. You can work on that layer as it's shown in your current project file and your current map, or you can pull this down and actually work on the data source, in which case it shows you the original sequencing of parcels, and you can change sort of those formats on them. All right, let's go back here. Let's go to this. Let's go here to this calc on here. Let's delete that. Let's add a new one. Calc sub. We want this to get stored in the sub. On here. PF. This is called name. On here. Good. Good. Let's go ahead and save these. Sorry. So if I think that you're getting this, I'm going to continue to go like this. If you have questions, if you're not quite getting it, or if you're not interested, tell me. There's other things that we can talk about. All right. So let's try this again. Let's create a polygon. We created a polygon, and under the sub, there's nothing in here. I didn't put anything in there this time. Here's a subdivision here, and it actually goes and fills in and automatically goes and drills down and finds out what subdivision this parcel is located in. Would this be helpful? Well, I can tell you a lot of our clients, their parcel number is built by the location, by the section in which it's located, the township, the range, the subdivision, the block, the lot number, and then a separate number. So you can have this built up so that every time you go and create a parcel or move a parcel, it goes through and validates the entire parcel number for you. So if I go in here right now, for example, and take this and move this over to here, what happens to my attributes? It says it's not in a sub anymore. It's been pulled out of a sub. All right. So let's take this one. Not that one. This one. And let's move that into a sub and let it go. And it now tells me it's in a sub now. So I can evaluate this and determine whether or not and whether or not it's valid as far as where these components are actually built and where these lines are actually built. Again, the parcel fabric has nothing to do with this. This is arcade. This is built into Pro. But when used in conjunction with the parcel fabric and used to sort of make your parcel mapping more efficient, it can be very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. All right. Attribute rules. That's a calculation attribute rule. I can also go and tell it to create a rule. This is a constraint rule. And let's call it no pin. All right. And I can tell it that on this, let me see here. I have to think a little bit more. I think I have this out here. I don't have it here. If the pin field is empty, all right, then I can tell it thank you. Nope. That's why I don't. Nope. I'm gonna have to, I won't demo this because I don't have it automatically pre-set up for you, but I could tell it that check to see whether or not there's a value in the pin field. If there's a value in the pin field, you're good. If there is no value, don't let me create this. All right, don't let me go and create this at all. Let's go and delete that. So that's the second type of attribute rule, is a constraint rule. And if I do that constraint rule, it will allow me to go and confine and say, make sure you fill these fields in. So it's not just calculate these other fields, but make sure these fields get properly filled in, or you're not going to be able to go and finish this. And then finally, a validation rule. Validation rule basically is a rule that gets fired off later, kind of like a topology error inspector. You can actually do a topology rule inspector, and it will go and analyze to see whether or not it's in there. And let me go and cheat. Here's what I really want. Oh, sorry. And I have to tell it an error number, and then I tell it to go and do my triggers. And let's go in here and save those changes. Save this. And as I did that, you see what happened over here? As I went and did this, it automatically said, hey, this polygon that you just created, you violated a rule. It said you had to have a pin. And this doesn't have a pin in it. So once I put something in here, then it no longer violates this rule. So just to show you, again, let's do this. Let's create a new parcel. And when I do this, it says you don't have a pin in this value on here. So to create a pin, I could go here and say, I want this to be that pin. And now it will allow me to go and actually finish this. It complied with the constraints, so it would allow me to go and finish this. So with this combination of attribute rules, calculations, constraints, you can build your data set so that as your mappers go and edit, they can have the software doing all the work to make sure that it complies with the rules, that it's set up the way it's supposed to be set up. So, for example, you can't go and build a parcel inside of a CSM unless there's a lot underneath it. You can have a constraint rule that says that a parcel can be no smaller than X number of square feet, or that it can be no larger than X number of square feet. You can set up a constraint rule that says, don't put a line in if it's got COGO values on it, if the difference between that COGO value and the actual shape length is greater than, it's 100 feet. Don't store a COGO value on a field if it's not a real value. Make sure that it's within that variance before you do it. Constraint rules become very, very powerful. As a matter of fact, you're going to start seeing, if you watch, you're going to start seeing Esri using more and more and more constraint rules rather than topology rules, because these are rules that have a little bit more intelligence in them, and when they're constrained, and this is the important thing, they are proactive. They catch the error before it goes into the data set, not after. This is another one of those things that changes the way we manage our parcel data, because it not just guarantees that structurally it's all there, but it also begins to start doing some error checking against the data. Is it all calculated? Is it correct? Is it fall within the margins that we're setting on here? These are the things that make the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric light years ahead of any of the data structures that we were using before. Are there any other questions about arcade rules, or excuse me, about attribute rules? Anything you'd want to see about this? All right. So quiet. So quiet. All right, so let's look at a couple other things here then. Let's walk back a little bit and make it a little bit less deep, a little bit less intense. No more programming. Well, I take that back. Maybe you are going to program a little bit, but right now, let's just walk it back a little bit. Let's talk about scale-based symbology for all of the layers that are inside the parcel fabric. Again, earlier today, I went and showed you that one of the interesting things is that it's set up so that as you zoom out and zoom in with the parcel fabric, if I zoom in here, as I zoom in, the symbology for that line starts changing. It starts, it has elements as I'm zooming in, and those elements disappear as I zoom out on here. How does it do that? Well, let's start with the simple things. Let's start with the fact that in here, under symbology, in this case, this is the symbology for the current view that I'm looking at. I can zoom out, and as I zoom out, right, this is the default zoomed in topology. If I click over here, I can go to scales, and this allows me to go and see, let's expand this a little bit here. It allows me to see that we actually have two scales set up here. Come on, Frank. There we go. We actually have two scales here, where if it's at this scale, 1 to 2,000, it's going to show the symbology at the end. let's go and change that. So it shows that scale all the way up to 1 to 24,000. And again, you'll note as I change this scale, it automatically went and changed that. So it now shows that from 24,000 in, all the way in, it has this symbology. Otherwise, it has this symbology on here. If I click on this it allows me to go to properties and then the actual symbol layers. And I can see that this contains 3 different symbols. It contains the solid stroke of the line. This is the traditional type of line feature class. It contains a marker. That marker is at the extremities of this line. And to show you as I go down here, I can look at the marker placement. The marker placement is placed at the very extremities of the line on here. This is at the beginning and ending of a line. These hollow markers are placed at this scale. And if I go to this shape, it actually will tell me that this marker is placed on the line. Not at the end, not even at the vertices, but on the line. So marker positioning, you can tell to do it along the line, along that line at random points, at extremities, on the line, on vertices, or a ratio or measured distances from them. I'm just doing it on the line right now. That's why on here you can see this is on the line. I personally find these a little bit offensive. So I almost always go and turn them off and say, go ahead and apply that so I don't see them all the time. But they're in there as part of the initial design, as you believe this helps you to figure out which way a shape or which way a direction is going, which way that line is going on there. And I can hit apply again, it will apply it back in there. So while we're talking about that, I have a shape. And right now it's saying that it starts on the west side, it's going towards the east. If I wish to flip that, I can right click and go to edit vertices and say, right click and say, change or reverse the direction on there. And you see suddenly that it's actually going the other direction in here. So there is a way to go and change directions on these lines. All right. Symbology. All right. So within the standard parcel fabric symbology, all line features have this type of symbology on them. So if you have, for example, connection lines in here, you'll know that as you zoom in, zoom out, those connection lines, those endpoints on the ends of those connection lines either appear or disappear. When we first discovered this, this was somewhat disconcerting because we were not familiar with scale-based symbology. But now that we understand it, it actually, it's useful. However, I wish that Esri would have put this so that the scales are a little bit further out. When you're doing a large subdivision, you want to see the ends of the lines as you're building them. You don't just want to see the standard lines as you go. Every line feature is like that. Same way with this. You go in here, change the scales, and I can change this so that instead of 2,000, it's at 24,000. Show me where those are. And now as I zoom out, I still have that set all the way out to 1 to 24,000 on here. Cocoa lines the same way. I can say, take the connector lines, go out to 24,000 on here, and show us these lines all the way out to 24,000. Again, little tiny tweaks, configurations inside the Parcel Fabric make a big difference in the way you're actually going and running with this. All right. I'm not sure how much further I want to go in here because I think that you're sponges and I think you're beginning to be completely saturated. Are there questions about this in here? Are there questions? Are there questions not about the details, but about the implementation? Do you want to go through the steps to actually go and publish onto a server the Parcel Fabric? You want to go through those slides? All right.
Sure.
Let me go in and do this. Let's go in. Here we go.
Frank, would you recommend, because we are in the ArcMap fabric, would you recommend getting the fabric as cleaned up as possible there before migrating it to the ArcGIS Pro fabric? Or is it quicker to clean up in Pro?
I would say no, do not do anything else in the ArcMap Parcel Fabric. It is faster inside of Pro. And you saw that earlier, just me cleaning up densified curves. All right, that's one of the big things inside of there. You'll have densified curves and how much easier it is to clean them up inside of the ArcMap Parcel Fabric. Some of that can be done on initial migration in. Some of it can be done after it's migrated in, like I did earlier. But by all means, the tools inside the parcel, inside of ArcGIS Pro, are so much cleaner. And actually, you saw that again in that when I did just before lunch, when I did that align features, and I using the old ArcMap terminology, I rejoined all those things in there so that they were joined together. I did that with one command, and I did that just by drawing it. And most importantly, it did it on every single layer at the same time. I didn't have to select them all. I didn't have to do anything else. I just said, these should all be joined to one straight line. Another thing, for example, here, and let's say that I had a realignment, a remonumentation that went on, and that this line should not be here anymore. It should be extended over a little bit more. I can use that same favorite tool, the Align Features tool, and I'm going to exaggerate this just sort of to show you here. But I want to go and say that instead, these parcels should actually now be something like this instead of where the current line is. And let me go in. Let me see if it's 20 feet. Not quite. Again, this is just to exaggerate it, just to demonstrate how these tools are so much better. And not just that, but down here, allow aligning features without a selection so that I don't have to select the sections, the subdivisions, the townships, quarter sections, anything that's turned on, that's displayed. I can now go and realign and make sure that they're all coincident with this line that I just drew. And let me go and turn off and make sure that my topology is turned off just in case. All right, and we go and do this again. All right, and now let it go and do that. That tool alone begs the question, why would you want to continue to go and work with all of the old ArcMap tools where you had to go and and select it, then you had to go and open it, then you had to go and move things, or then you had to go and select it and then rejoin it,
Mhm.
and then all that. So for example, things like this, see that there's a space between two lines? I can go in here, let's take this back down again now, and say, well, actually, this is where these lines should be, and have it go and automatically clean that up so that there's vertical alignment, that there's coincident, that there's nothing between the two. The tools inside the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric are so much stronger than the others because you're dealing primarily with just sort of, and Jason's not here anymore, with cartographic license. Now you're now coming in here and you're cleaning this up correctly the way it should have been put, and it's not constrained that old structure that we had before. Don't even bother cleaning anything else up, bring it in. However, don't, be aware that I'm trying to figure out the sequence in which to say this. When you go and bring in a parcel fabric, all right, an ArcMap parcel fabric, and you bring it into the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric, there's a tool called Upgrade ArcMap Parcel Fabric. All right.
Mhm.
That tool, what it does is it goes and takes the old structure and goes and attempts to modify it and bring it into new structure. But there's an assumption here. The assumption is that you were fastidious in using plans. All right. So every time there's a plan, it creates a new record, a corresponding record inside of the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric. But if you didn't use plans for everything, literally everything, you use the map default plan, the system plan, then everything gets created using the same record.
Mhm.
And the problem with that is that means you've got one polygon, which basically covers all your records, all your parcels, and the spatial indexing that occurs and the indexing that occurs as a relation of that slows down your parcel fabric. So that if you're going to migrate from the ArcMap Parcel Fabric into ArcGIS Parcel Fabric, you want to clean up your plan table before you go and make that migration. All right. There's ways to do it. We've done it multiple times, over a dozen times now. It's really not tough if you do it a couple times. So the first time you do it, you want to just drag your hair out because there's certain constraints and locks and stuff that won't let you do it. So let us know if you want to go and just migrate it. It's much easier to have us do it.
Yeah.
But again, overall, I would say migrate into the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric, test it out and see. I think you're going to find that it's much more efficient inside of there than in the ArcMap Parcel Fabric. That's a good question now. It's a good question. So the question becomes, well, what about enterprise deployment and what about publishing this? We actually have a couple slides here. Sorry, this is from a workshop we were doing. Okay. This is that slide that I talked about earlier, where depending upon the version of the parcel fabric and the version or release of ArcGIS Pro, you want to make sure that this is compatible all the way through. So if you're using 2.4 Pro, you should be using Enterprise 10.7.1, 2.5, 10.8, 2.6, 10.8.1, 2.7, 10.9. Problem is 10.9 is not fully released. There's a pre-release out, but it's not fully released yet. So we recommend you don't go to 2.7 fully yet. You build the parcel fabric in 2.6, deploy it with 10.8.1. Interestingly, during this workshop, and these slides are all from a workshop we did a couple of weeks ago. One of our clients said, well, we've got a 10.8.1 deployment originally with our parcel fabric is at release number 3, but we've been using ArcGIS Pro 2.7 to edit it, and we don't have any problems. Like, okay, Esri says you shouldn't do that, but it might be worth experimenting with. There are some interesting things in 2.7 that are not in 2.6. The other thing is, what about database compatibility? What type of database are you using? You use Postgres, SQL Server, Azure, Oracle? What are you using out there? Because there are some different compatibilities in here. You just want to be careful with that. And then licensing. What licensing do you have? You do need it standard and advanced with both of these, but inside of here, you also want to have the Parcel Fabric user type. Again, we work you through all that. There is a performance patch for 10.8.1 you should go and put on there. So here's the steps. You take your file geodatabase, take the feature data set, copy and paste it onto your server that you're going to use as sort of the data store. Paste it on there. This, believe it or not, is one of the trickier things because you have to make sure that you have the correct privileges to create the schema, to create data, to go and copy it over. You then create a database connection to your server, all right, and set it up so it has branch versioning on it. Not SDE versioning, not standard traditional versioning, but branch versioning on it. You then go and make sure that your parcel fabric has global IDs on it, make sure that it has editor tracking turned on, and then you make sure that when you've got it, you set it up as register as versioned with branch versioning. Make sure it's versioned. There's some tests that you want to do to make sure that it's going to be versioned. And then you add it to a map. You pull it into a project. Add it to a map. Then once it's in the map, you go and tell it to go ahead and publish that map out. You don't worry about configuration. All that stuff I went this afternoon, don't worry about that because you're going to have to reset that once it's on the server. Then you want to validate the share. Just make sure this doesn't give you any warnings on it about registering it. And then you go and connect to the individual feature services. You open up a project, you bring in the service, and you reconnect and make sure that it's all set up correctly. You set up your versioning, your branch versioning, and you go and begin editing. All right. So, I mean, it's not overly complicated, but there's a couple little tricks in there that you want to be aware of. You want to make sure the conditions are right before you start. Then slowly but surely, you want to work through those steps on there. Again, over half of the deployments we've done so far, they've been enterprise deployments. A couple of things we didn't talk about, things like annotation. Do you have annotation? Do you not have annotation? If you have annotation, is it feature linked or is it non-feature linked? You can have annotation inside of a parcel fabric. Let's start with that. In a file geodatabase, it's pretty easy to set up, but there's a warning. ArcGIS Pro annotation has a different structure than ArcMap annotation. Once you go and upgrade your annotation so it works in Pro, you can't read it in Map anymore. All right, just be aware of that. The second thing is that in a file geodatabase, feature linked annotation uses its object IDs as the main keys back and forth, the primary and the foreign keys. With a service-based, it does not use object IDs, it uses the global IDs. So you sort of have to understand where you're going and then have it configured correctly for those on there. All right. How much more information do you want out of this? I can see we've dwindled down to 14 people in here. What questions do we have on here? What would you like me to demonstrate on here?
Myself, I'm just, interested. I'm just watching the different things that you're able to do. We're not in the Parcel Fabric yet. We've decided that we will implement it at some point. And we used to be concerned with getting our data cleaned up first. But from this presentation and from another one I had taken in, it was said, it's at this point now you're better off bringing that data in and kind of making those adjustments within the Parcel Fabric, whether it's in our Pro, as you said. So that's certainly on my mind. And so it's just a question of when. We are still densifying our section corner coordinates. So we wanted to get those in place first, or as many as, or more of them. So it might be a year or two yet before we would make that leap, but we're getting much closer. But it's nice to see what's capable. So that's why I was interested in sitting in on this one.
And I can tell you that often when we start talking about this, we mash up the Parcel Fabric and ArcGIS Pro. All right. Often we're thinking of these things as one thing, when in fact they're two. If you are currently in ArcMap and you're not in a Parcel Fabric, but you're just using simple feature classes, whether you have topology or not, you should consider starting to use Pro anyway. Things like my favorite tool, Align Features, that works in Pro. It doesn't work. I mean, it's not a Parcel Fabric tool. It's an ArcGIS Pro tool. Attribute rules, those are Pro tools. Those are not Parcel Fabric tools. This is all built on top. The configuration, all of that. A majority of what I showed today is not necessarily the fabric. It is Pro. It is where they're going with Pro, where Esri is putting all the development and the tools in here. These, just being in Pro, even if you're still in traditional versioning inside of SDE, this gives you huge opportunities to go and clean up your data, get it in there correctly, and fix everything that you see that's wrong. First, things like just being able to identify where are your densified curves. If you're not in a Parcel Fabric, you don't know where the densified curves are. Let me go and show you something here. Let me go and create a new map here. And let me go into this folder. And I have here some data here. This is data. All right. This is data that somebody was asking me as well. I need to go and bring this into the Parcel Fabric. I don't know a whole lot about my data. Well, if I go in here, and look at this. And if I right click and say edit vertices, I can see, oh my gosh, this data has got a lot of densified curves in it. Well, I don't have to do that because I can actually go and have Pro show me where all the densified curves are before I even think about bringing this in and building polygons for it or anything else on here. By using just some regular Pro symbology tricks, I can go in here to my symbology on here, and I can let's go here and do it this way. It's easier. I go in there and on that symbol, on this symbol, I can say, create a new marker for me. And this was something that you could never do inside of map. Just this one thing, create a new, and that symbol right there, let me go and make it red so we can see this. And let me make it maybe 5 points. Yeah, make it 4 points, make it small. And then let me go and take that, and every time there's a vertex on that polygon, put that marker there. So now when I do this, suddenly, without me doing anything else, I can see issues with my current data. All right? And if I don't have any other layers or anything else in here, I can go in here and using my favorite tool, all right, using my favorite tool, I can go in here and let's make sure I'm using the right tool here. I can go in here and say, clean up all of my curves in here that I have in here. That quickly. I can go in here and individually go and do that. Secondly, I can go in there and say, well, if I have a gap or an overlap between here, I can draw my other layers on here. I can begin doing cleanup with my geometry because of that. I can also start using things like the data reviewer tools, or I can just use them right out of here and start creating attribute rules that say, okay, now let's start looking at whether or not we've got enough attribution on everything, where it's located. Pro has so many more tools than ArcMap ever had or thought of. And just the ability to go and not just do alignments, because that actually was inside of ArcMap. But you could only use the trace tool and you had to go and select your features beforehand. Esri has learned and they've learned how to do it, and they allow you to do it on any layer you have that's turned on and visible, not just the ones you select. So these types of tools inside of Pro are so much better and so much more advanced than anything we had in ArcMap. Again, if you don't have to be considering going over to the Parcel Fabric, just use Pro to clean up your data. You can go in and take and connect up to your SDE server, bring your feature classes in there in SDE versioning, clean them up, save them out, and your ArcMap mappers will never know that you clean this up that in Pro. Pro can use these invisibly. You won't know the difference whether you're editing them in ArcMap or Pro. The only caveat there is those attribute rules, you can't use those because once you put them in, ArcMap doesn't know what that is and it won't read that database. But everything else, all the standard types of tools in here, it's, again, I can't speak highly enough about what Esri's done with some of this little cleanup. It's like, how much of that stuff, removing extra vertices in here, all of that. And you can have topology, you can validate your topology and everything else in here, but it's just little things like this. See where the issues are, clean them up, and let me continue with it. Just make your data better as you go through here. So, yeah. I appreciate you staying here, Jeremiah, especially if you're not even interested initially in the Parcel Fabric. But I think eventually we're all going to see the value of what they've done in Pro so far.
Yeah, I just loaded Pro about 2 weeks ago, and I've really enjoyed using it the limited amount I have. We actually ran into some speed issues all of a sudden after the initial setup. So everything was working well, and then all of a sudden that stopped happening, and we haven't been able to resolve why. But I'm enjoying it. I just have some other issues to resolve now.
There are some caching issues because it tends to cache some of these values in here, some of sort of displaying and stuff. There are some caching issues you want to be aware of as you're going through that, but overall, it's much better in here, much better in Pro than in ArcMap. I will share with you. I actually, I've been hired to go and teach some state of Florida 911 coordinators GIS, and they wanted me to teach them ArcMap, and I said, no, I'm not going to teach you things that are outdated anymore. I'm going to teach you Pro. The scary thing, and this is scary, is that ArcGIS Pro has already been out for 5 years. 5 years since 1.0. And it's like, oh, wow, we've really not kept up with this, have we? It's been out there for a while now, and it's pretty stable. Well, not pretty stable. It's actually very stable. I haven't crashed it in years now. But you do have to, you want to run it on a new computer, not a 3 or 4 year old computer. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So this again, this was some of the things that caused us to go and move over and start using Pro extensively. And we started using it from 2.1 and on because of some of these tools, at just being able to show us where things were bad, where we had problems with things, and start evaluating whether there are gaps and overlaps and things of that sort. So on here. All right. What other questions or other comments? What would you like me to show you on this? Again, this is our time to go in and use our experience to help you understand a little bit better where you might need to sort of do some more investigating on it. Brett, did you have anything? I can see that Brett's trying to talk, but I think his mic might be muted.
No, I don't have anything.
Okay.
I think there's 2 Bretts, so I wasn't sure.
There are, sorry. I should have said double T. Right?
2 T's, no N.
2 T's, no N. Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right.
No, I'm always interested in these because, you know, we are in the Fabric, but in ArcMap.
ArcMap, yes.
Just wondering when to pull the trigger to move into the next generation, next version.
Yes. And another one of the things that you want to consider is, if you're in the ArcMap Parcel Fabric, you have to go and export out. You have to do an ETL to get for your publication. Within the new Parcel Fabric, you don't necessarily have to do that, because these feature classes that are shown here that are part of the Parcel Fabric, those are really just simple feature classes on here. That's all they are. If you have them in a file geodatabase, you could go in and share them out, or you could go and do an ETL over to, as we have many of our clients doing, you can go in and share them over to a SQL Server or some sort of SDE implementation and export that out. We have several clients that actually share these up to ArcGIS Online right from here, publish it up to ArcGIS Online and do that. And if you're in an enterprise implementation, all your publication really is just taking and consuming those services. You don't have the ETL that you need. So Carmen, thank you. Does ArcGIS Pro maintain the rotation skew after adjustments are made? Yes. You got to be careful when you talk about adjustments. There are different ways of thinking and doing with this. So if we're talking about a least squares adjustment or the adjustment that occurs, for example, and I might as well real quickly demonstrate this. Let's go and create a record. Let's go through this process, create a record. Then let's go over here and do a traverse. All right, and on our traverse, let's go and have Parcel Fabric lines in here. But let's also recognize that maybe we have a bearing and assumed rotation going on. So we have a ground to grid. All right. So let's say that, let's really skew this thing out. And let's say that, in fact, this is supposed to be north 45 degrees east. And this is the line that's assumed to be north 45 degrees east. All right. Now, when I go in here and I do this, let's see there. So again, it will tell me what that rotation is. And I can go in here and say, my survey says this is north 45 degrees east for 200 feet. All right. And note, even though it's recording the information that's stored on the deed, on the CSM, on the subdivision, it's automatically rotating it for me. And I'm just going to go and do a real simple square here. All right, do a real simple square. I'm done with that. Let me go and create a seed. Oh, I still have attributes, don't I? I have a whole bunch of stuff in here that's going to fire this thing off. And let's go back here. Sorry. Let's discard this. I'll redo that one. Sorry about that. I forgot that I had been messing around with this. Let's get rid of that attribute rule. All right, let's go back here. Let's go and create this record again. Let's go and set. We've got that same offset set in here. Let's go to traverse, Parcel Fabric lines, start here. 45 degrees northeast. And let's do it 300 feet. Let's go back here. All right, and now I could do a deflection notice of 90 feet, 90 degrees. So I can automatically input that in. Let's do 300 feet, deflect again, 300, and it tells me what my closure is. So I've created this parcel, these lines on the parcel. If I want to, I can say, just show me those lines, and it does. I can go and create the seeds for it. I can go and build, which will automatically turn my lines, everything else back on as it's building this. All right. I can then go and say align parcels, which, by the way, this align parcels is actually joining. On here, I can go and say, let's go ahead and put an anchor here. We know that's going to be there. I can tell it and ask it where to go and do this. And I can say that this actually goes here. It's actually quite a ways off on there. That should be right on that alignment. Go and change this just. All right, here. It's gonna shows me where it's going to join this to, where it's going join is something that doesn't do anymore. It goes and makes sure there's coincidence. And I can say, go ahead and join this up, right? It went and automatically joined it, made it coincident. I can then tell it, all right, now let's go ahead and, oh, by the way, notice the bearings on here? The original bearings that I told it to put in there. Okay. And then I can say, let's go ahead and clip this out. And I can say, go ahead and let's turn off our subdivision just in case. Go ahead and clip our parcels. It will tell us there's our remaining parcel. There's our new parcel automatically. Let's go, and it took the PIN number, automatically did the calculation for us, calced out the stated area. It must have had a square footage on there before, but it automatically went and calculated all of that for me. All right. So the question you had was when you do an adjustment. If I do a simple feature adjustment, it does not change any of the COGO, keeps the COGO. If I do a ground to grid rotation, it stores what I input. And just sort of to go and verify this, if I look at the features associated with this and go in here, I could see what the rotation was, what the scale was on here for these lines that I input here. I could see what all the rotation was on there. It took that ground to grid and automatically stored that. So it knew what those were. So to answer your question, depending upon how you define that adjustment, yeah, it stores, it keeps those. If I do a least squares adjustment, I have that option as far as what it's going to do. It's going to use these values for that least squares adjustment as much as possible. So I can share with you from experience, editing inside the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric is a lot easier. It's a lot smoother. It provides an awful lot of tools. Little tool like this. This is extra vertices that were put in there, some of which I was just thinking about some elements in here. There's a tool in 2.7, merge points tool, where I can go and tell it, and it will show me here the points and says, okay, here's the one. What happens if I use this other point in here? It'll show me how it's adjusting it to the two different points, and I can tell which one I want to go and do it for. If I have a control point in my collection, it automatically goes and says, it shows me that first. It says, this is where your control point is. This is where you should be making these adjustments. When I say merge, that point actually disappears. All right, so it automatically allows me to go and clean up these lines in here. Thank you, Carmen. She's thinking more manual adjustments, not least squares. Thanks for showing me this. So yeah, manual adjustments, you know, when I go and I move using feature adjustments, it's not changing any of the information that's stored on those features, on those lines or anything else. It's just kind of moving them, moving where they're supposed to be located. Kind of like what we used to do with, let's go and select this point here. And let's do a move on it. This is one of the things Ezra used to like to show. And if I go and take this and I move it, what happens? It goes and automatically moves the lines redefines the polygons, does all of that. That still works inside the Parcel Fabric. I should tell you, I'll share with you, that's not the Parcel Fabric. That is topology that's doing that. Because if I go in here and I say move on this, and I move it within the limits of topology, it's fine. But if I try to move it outside, it breaks. And when I move that point outside where topology is still valid, it automatically goes and redefines where those lines are supposed to go and such. That's topology that's doing that. That's standard Esri topology that's doing that. It's not a Parcel Fabric that's doing that. So again, it's a really nice combination using these old traditional sort of topology tools with the Parcel Fabric to control and make sure all these new types of rules are complied with. All right.
What's your recommendation for handling all of the other, well, you did touch on it earlier, but when you've got jurisdictional layers that are tied to parcels or vice versa, you know, because, you know, we have parcels and subdivisions, but then on top of that, you've got municipal boundaries. And, you know, if you have to adjust the boundaries of those parcels right at that administrative boundary, it's effective to, well, I have to do them one by one. So I'm changing my emergency services layers. I'm changing my municipal boundaries. I'm changing, and it's not just one emergency service layer, it's multiple ones in many cases, plus school district boundaries in some cases, and on and on. So,
yep. So I have a municipality boundary here. All right. This could be a zoning. This could also be on top of this, a zoning layer, this could be a whole series of schools, districts, whatever. It could be other layers. What I'm suggesting is don't bring those into the Parcel Fabric, even though the Parcel Fabric can accommodate them, because the reality is they probably don't need line feature classes associated with them. All they need to do is stay in compliance with the parcel layout. So if I go in here and use, again, sorry to do this all the time, but use my favorite tool. All right, now let's go in and just exaggerate this so that we can understand how this is doing it. It will go and correct them. It will go and correct them. All right. Even if they're not in the Parcel Fabric, ArcGIS Pro allows you to go and collect and correct the location of those lines. Oh, I have parcel topology turn on. I have to turn off topology. Let's make sure I get those points inside of here. I've turned off topology so that it doesn't give me errors when I collapse certain lines in here. And I tell it to go ahead and realign all those, the municipalities, the zoning layers, the school districts, make them coincident with the things I have in my Parcel Fabric. All right. If I have a change on this here, I can tell it to go in here and select this municipality. All right. And I can do a reshape on that and tell it, again, I can manually do this, or I'm just doing this only because it's on here. The tools in Pro are pretty amazing. And again, if I have more than one layer turned on, I can say, okay, allow me to go and do this without even having to make a selection, Maybe that's the new configuration for reshaping all of these things on here. I can do that with this right here. It's ArcGIS tools are actually pretty interesting. Very nice. Good question, though. Thank you, Jeremiah. So again, that's the reason why, one of the reasons why I don't recommend you bring these other administrative boundaries inside of the parcel fabric. Just, you really don't need a whole set of lines for those boundaries unless you really have legal descriptions plotted out for them. But you just want to make sure they come in compliance with everything else in here. I can tell you there, there are some really interesting things when you start taking the parcel fabric and serving it out as a feature service. In ArcMap Parcel Fabric, there was a function called Adjust Features, which took the stored adjustment vectors as you moved points, and you could retrieve them and apply them to other layers. The Parcel Fabric, the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric has exactly that function if you have deployed this on an enterprise level, because it actually uses branch versioning and the time moments in branch versioning to make those sort of readjustments as you go along. I think I have lulled you into silence. Sorry. Let's see if I need to go and take this and reshape this so that it includes this other parcel here. I can just go in here and say, I didn't intersect it, sorry. All right. So do we have any other questions on here? Again, I'm sorry I have to keep asking that, but I want to sort of make sure that you get everything you want out of this. Did I get you thinking? Did I get you at least thinking about maybe there's other ways that we can do some of these things that we're doing right now? And maybe there are, maybe I intrigued you with some of the tools that are in here. And like I said, most of what I showed today really wasn't the parcel fabric. It was the pro tools. But the parcel fabric is cool. The parcel fabric, the ability to go and make sure that things are structurally sound, make sure that the parcels are complete as you go along. This is all very, very important. And it's something that as administrator, land information administrator, you're always concerned about the quality of the data that's being built. All right. Jeremiah, thank you. Yeah, you're always concerned with the quality of the data. And this is, for the most part, the first time that as an old, GIS administrator, and I admit I was a GIS administrator in the mid 80s, I could see that I had the tools available to me to set up a data structure that served as sort of a custodian. It made sure that everything got done correctly as I was going through it. And that's what gets me excited about this more than anything else. So Carbon, we're coming up on 3 o'clock your time, Central Time.
Yes.
Is there anything else you want me to talk about?
I was just putting a question in the chat, but I can ask it out loud. I don't mean to dominate with the questions, but since you're here. So my question was, for those who are currently editing Parcel Fabric and SDE, and like I mentioned, we have the ArcMap version of Parcel Fabric right
Yes.
now. Do you recommend storing PLSS, the control points, in a separate file geodatabase, or should that be, because I think we are using the model, and I noticed that it really slows things down whenever that's turned on. So just wondering if you had a recommendation for that. Can it be separate? Does it matter?
That's really an interesting question. I thank you for asking that, because when you're making the transition out of the ArcMap Parcel Fabric, out of the old local government information model into this type of data structure, one of the intriguing things is that you don't have to use that old data structure. You can use this in a way that it's more advantageous to you. And one of the things that we recommend is that unless you're a survey department, don't keep your PLSS in a Parcel Fabric. Now, if you're a survey department, you can have a separate Parcel Fabric on there. So what that means is that you can have inside a table of contents, you can have a set of layers for the PLSS. All right, we go in here and you know, just say, okay, put the PLSS layers in here and put them down here. And they don't have to be in the Parcel Fabric. Matter of fact, one of the reasons why you don't want them in the Parcel Fabric is you don't want to have mappers or yourselves touching those things all the time. Once they have been built, they should not be modified in any way. So you can go in there and I'm going to pretend that this group layer here is the PLSS. All right. I can go in there and I can set it so that I can snap to the PLSS corners. I can select those parcels, those section corners and such if I want to, but I can tell it to not allow me or anybody in my mapping to edit any of the data that's on there. Inside of Pro, I can set edit rights, I can set the selection rights, and I can set the snapping rights, all for my project file. So if you have the PLSS, you can pull it in, use it as a reference, trace it, snap to it, whatever you want, but set it so that you can't edit it. You can't modify the location in any way possible. And that's radically different than the way ArcMap had it, because in ArcMap, if it was in the Parcel Fabric, if you had rights to edit anything, any layer in the Parcel Fabric, you had rights to edit the PLSS in here, everything in there. So it goes and allows you, this transition from ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro allows you to rethink, should everything be editable by my cadastral editors, or should I have certain things separated where I can still view it, I can see it, I can use it as a reference, but I don't want to be able to edit it. It's not my data. It's a survey or engineering department's data. That's a great question. And I can tell you that standard, when you go migrate in, it pulls it in, but you want to think about, do I really want to keep that in there, or do I want to pull it out? Because you're right, it does go and slow it down because of the way the ArcMap Parcel Fabric is all interrelated. And anytime you touch one thing, you touch multiple things on here. The ArcGIS Parcel Fabric does not work that way. That's the other thing. It doesn't matter how many vertices are on a polygon, it doesn't slow it down. It's another reason why, whereas inside the Arc one you do. So Jeremiah, you also asked, what other types of data sets do you believe would work well in a Parcel Fabric type of solution? For example, NextGen 911. It's required the center lines and the underlying polygons button up to one another, or is this just a topology situation? And the reality is you hit it on the head with the second solution. It is not. The only reason why you want to go and keep any information in the Parcel Fabric is you want to be able to trace the lineage of it, and you want to make sure that it has lines and polygons on it. All right. Everything that's in the Parcel Fabric has to have a line and a polygon corresponding feature set. So if you don't want to trace it, if you don't want to keep track of every time changes occurred in it, don't put it in the fabric. If you only have polygons like these administrative boundaries and such, don't put it in the fabric. If it's very static and doesn't change, if ever, like a PLSS, don't put it in the fabric. Let the surveyors manage that. Let the surveyor engineering department go and manage those reference layers. Those are foundational reference layers. They are not transactional layers, which is what the subdivisions and CSMs and conveyance divisions and tax polygons and easements, those are all transactional, all right? But these others are more foundational and they are more static. They don't get changed very often. You want to think about your data, think about, does it deserve to go in there? Or to turn that around a little bit, am I willing to put in all the effort that's required if it's in the fabric? Because there is effort. You have to create lines for every single polygon that you build. There's a lot of effort in there. You did say something there about center lines. So there's this concept of these connection lines in here. And Esri continues to say that one of the things that you can use connection lines for is you can use it to map out your center lines. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because it then means that in order to edit those, you want to be in the Parcel Fabric. And the people I know, the people I train, the E911 coordinators, they shouldn't be in the Parcel Fabric. They should just be editing. They're concerned about contiguity. They're concerned about gaps and overlaps. They're concerned about consistency, that these zones are consistent with the center lines. That's all they're concerned about. I can share with you that one of the interesting things we're teaching some of these E911 coordinators here in Florida is the use of attribute rules and Arcade inside of the address management solution. And some of those more advanced solutions now are beginning to use attribute rules. You're seeing attribute rules used in more and more of the solutions that Esri puts out, only because it's a great way to go and build intelligence into your data set. These are not just primitive, lines that you scratch out or that you use a chisel on stone. Everything that we should be doing has some intelligence in it. We want to start building this intelligence into our data. Let's make our data more intelligent. Carmen says, have you ever seen where zoning districts are maintained as a separate layer in the Parcel Fabric? I have seen it in the old ArcMap Parcel Fabric, yes. I actually saw it in one of our clients down in Georgia. Actually has a zoning layer that they have inside of the ArcMap Parcel Fabric. because that was their initial thought. We talked them through that. They said, yes, they wanted to put it in anyway. The reality is they're coming back and saying, no, we think we're going to pull it out. We're just going to pull it out of there. Because zoning layers don't have lines associated, boundary lines on them, right? They just have polygons. It's just wherever that polygon is. So they have found that it's a lot more work to keep the zoning layer in that parcel fabric than to have it just as a separate layer that gets referenced, that gets cleaned up and manipulated and worked on with that. So, yeah, I like the way you're all are thinking now. You're thinking outside this box. What should go in, what shouldn't go in, those sorts of things. And again, my recommendation is if it's transactional, if you want to track the lineage on it, put it in a fabric. If it has to have lines and polygons, put it in a fabric. If any of those tests are failed, don't put it in a fabric. Use the ArcGIS Pro tools to maintain it as you go.
So in other words, perhaps easements, because they are transactional, would be something to have in there. Not that I really look forward to mapping easements. We haven't done that yet. And that's, that one carries a lot of weight. And
well, the question would be not just the easements, but what are you tracking about the easements? Are you basically just tracking where it's located, who the dominant estate is on it, maybe who the servient estate is on it, and what is it? Is it, it's 10-foot wide utility easement that is in favor of one entity versus another? Yeah. Well, maybe when was it created? But the reality is, and this is sort of, I see this all the time when I look at the way people map easements. Many times all they do is they put a line there to denote the outer boundary of the easement, and they put a piece of text in there and says, oh, there's a 10-foot easement covering this area between the line and the boundary, and that's all they do. Do they really want to track when it was created, when it was abandoned? Is there really that same sort of transactional nature or the lineage that you want to go and evaluate against an easement? I've done both. I've done both in my career. And Brett with 2 T's knows me well enough that one of my favorite expressions is, as does Andrea, one of my favorite expressions is the juice worth the squeeze? Yes, you could do that. Is it worth it? Should you do it? Because there's effort involved with it. Is it something you really want to do? Is it something you need? Has anyone ever asked, what's the boundaries of this easement?
I get asked that frequently, but it's from a zoning perspective, because it's a question of when this easement was created, was it legal? Or was it created after the point in time when they should have had 66 feet in width? So we have a lot of substandard easements that were created after a rule went into effect. And so then we have to dig. Likewise for setbacks also.
Right. Right.
For where structures get built. And so every situation, then you kind of have to line it up. But the problem with easements are, there's a lot, sometimes, well, easements, parcels are one thing, but easements, you have some gray areas at times as to what they really were trying to convey. That's a whole nother can of worms at times. So
remember, Jeremiah, I'm a surveyor. Boy, I know about easements. Yes. It's, again, when was it created? Why was it created? How was it described? All of this. And to be honest, one of the problems we have is that historically, we haven't felt they were important enough to go and track. When was it created? What parties were involved in it? Is there some sort of dissolution of it? Does it expire I mean, or is it perpetual easements? To a lesser extent, what is the actual boundary? Was it described by meets and bounds, or was it described as referencing another boundary line in there? Was it described as a strip easement off of a center line? Again, a lot of that, for so often, we weren't really concerned with all of that data. If we are, maybe we should have it in a parcel fabric. But if not, maybe we can just represent it almost like a gazetteer and then just go and reference off to the document that created it. It's, was it legal? Well, legal really more comes into play is that was there documentation? Were the procedures followed in order to go and create that? Not necessarily what's the shape, what's the dimensions of it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for myself, this is Brett. I was going to say that all those points you just hit are important. Adding the easements to the parcel map to the cadastre, I think, is mostly that good indication that, hey, you should go find out more about this in the recorded documents. But then it does get back to what you were just saying. In the past, maybe we didn't show them, maybe we did. And now if we start to show them all and people are looking at my parcel, my cadastre map, and they don't see an easement, oh, well, there's no easement there. Well, that's possibly not the case. You still need to do your research. So
interesting. I can share with you that down here in Florida, the Department of Revenue requires that an easement be shown if it dramatically impacts the value of a property. I would argue that any easement dramatically impacts the value of the property, but their response is no, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. We'll give you the great big, 100-foot wide electrical easements. Yeah, you should show those, but those little utility easements, nah, don't have to show those. And it's like, it's so loose and it's so ill-defined that you might not, you might as well not even have that in there. And so when I go around to the various property appraisers in Florida, they're not listers or assessors, they're appraisers. When I go around to the appraisers in Florida, I find there's a minority, that's it. Very few of them actually map easements. And, but again, easements are another type of land record. And who has that interest in property? How I can share with you in my long career, I've worked on both sides of it. I worked for a utility company. I also worked for a landowner. And when we were a landowner, we were very concerned about who was using that easement. And we had granted some drainage easements for some property across some vacant land we had, and they put in drainage canals. We found out later that they were permitting a utility company to install pipes in there. And we were like, we never granted any easement interest to that utility company, pull them out. They didn't pull them out. We wound up eventually getting into an agreement with them, and we granted some easements for the utility pipes in there. But there's just a general understanding out there what an easement actually is. It's a right to use property, but it's very limited. And that's another reason why, Jeremiah, you want to make sure that you have some information about what is the limitations of the use of this easement. Who can use it? How can they use it? Why can they use it? All of this. That's important information.
Which is often never touched upon in the easement.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Especially easements that are dedicated. Yeah. Or blanket easements. Those are even almost as bad. Yeah. I enjoy this discussion. This is interesting. For those of you that are in our workshops that I talked about this morning, this is the type of discussions that we get into after we stop the recording. And we call it office hours. It's like, okay, well, let's start talking back and forth about this. And that's one reason why on our deep dives, Nancy and I had a couple of deep dives where it was recorded, because we started talking about things and everybody that were in there was like, that's really interesting stuff. Why don't you record this? so we started recording some of Nancy and my discussions on there. Nancy von Meyer, sorry, if you're not familiar. All right, so again, I feel like I keep asking this, but does anybody want to go back to work, or do you want to talk more about some of these issues? You can tell I get animated when I start talking about land records and what they are and how to go and maintain them and map them, and how deep do you have to go and map them, that sort of thing.
I think for myself, I always question, and I like your metaphor there, squeezing the orange. How important is that juice? And what, you know, just because we can doesn't mean we should, because that value of that data, sometimes I question it. So those are some of the things that I am always trying to balance.
Yeah, I agree. It's and again, as I've served on both sides, I've been the person that was responsible for all the GIS data, for the GIS systems, for all the land records. I've also been a consultant to try to go and help people, and we try to balance it out and say, just because you can do this doesn't mean that's what you should do. Make sure you go and understand the impact it's going to have on you. Again, is it worth it for you to do this? And I find myself many times just talking you out of it. Don't do that. There's other ways. You really want to think about what you're doing. Again, I remember as an administrator what we had to do to maintain some of this data. You want to make it as seamless as you can for your mappers. Otherwise, they get bogged down in these details. Let the software work for you rather than anything else. See if you can document those business rules, put those in place, and move forward with that. But don't bog down your mappers with too much extraneous things that just because somebody says that might be a good idea to track, that suddenly you've got all this extra effort put into it that really no one ever asks about. Carmen, you asked a good question there. What's the biggest Parcel Fabric issue you've seen? When we're talking about the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric, the biggest issue by far, this is recorded, isn't it? The biggest issue that I've seen, and I've shared this with Esri, is that the level of effort between taking the Parcel Fabric and using it as a file geodatabase, and then just putting in place multi-user editing, putting it so that you have versioned editing available on your Parcel Fabric, which means implementing enterprise server, going and pushing out the branch versioning and publishing your data. That difference between the simple implementation for a small organization in a file geodatabase, literally anybody can do that, and putting it into enterprise, there's a huge difference between there, because putting it into multi-user, multi-editor enterprise in here requires a whole new level of resources and knowledge and information to do it. You've got to have in place a server. You've got to have in place your enterprise license agreement. So suddenly to go from 1 user to 2 users, suddenly you've got this huge jump on here. That's more than anything right now the biggest issue. How do you do that? To the point where about half of our implementations are, we only have 1 editor, or we have 2 editors, but they alternate days in which they're working. It's like, okay, keep it in a file geodatabase. Don't go extravagant and put all this other stuff in there. Sorry, Esri. Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's that enterprise level. The fact that you've got to keep the level of the software on your enterprise server so that it's the same as the desktop. That's a big challenge right now. And I can tell you the functionality. Yeah, this is great stuff. This is really nice stuff. I can't think of very few things that's not in here yet. And I can share with you that in a couple days, I'm going to start testing 2.8 alpha version for some of the new functionality they're trying to develop and starting to develop. I can think of very few things that's not in here that I would want to have in here. It's pretty much complete now. It is the challenge of when I want to go from a small organization to a medium size, it's that medium size. That's where all the challenge is. That's the biggest issue right now with Parcel Fabrics. If you're a big organization, yeah, you've got database administrators, you've got people that manage all your services and all that. You've got all that in place. I'll share this story with you. One of our clients is the city of Arlington in Texas, right? They've got about 230,000 parcels. 230,000 parcels. And their IT staff is really sharp. But like so many IT staffs, they are reluctant to put new implementations of enterprise server on their network. So they were still back at 10.7.1. But their mappers, and by the way, they only have 2 mappers for all those parcels. They wanted to get into the Parcel Fabric, and the Parcel Fabric was great for them. We developed some attribute rules that would drill down through multiple layers and automatically populate all of these things that they've been struggling with for years. They have feature linked annotation that's running, and they're at that position now where everything works. They've proved everything. They know it works. But the question for them is, do they fully publish this out on an enterprise server, or do they keep it in a file geodatabase and just do exporting over to their SDE for publication? And it's because of that jump, that barrier. And this is a big organization. They've got probably 10 people, IT programmers, that sort of thing, working for them, and they're still saying, what they're saying is the juice worth the squeeze. Yet I've got others that even smaller ones, some in Wisconsin. It's like, yeah, this works. This is easy. This is better than the ARC map. We don't have those struggles anymore. I'm going to shut my mouth so I don't get myself in trouble anymore. Sorry. I am an Esri business partner. I'm a loyal Esri business partner. That doesn't mean I can't push them to do things really well. And I think with the Parcel Fabric, it's really good. I wish there was a middle solution though.
Frank, here's a question I thought about when I first Pro and the ARC's services for Parcel Fabric. And obviously you're in the industry of doing this, but it occurred to me this could fundamentally, a few years down the line, change the way parcels are managed for counties, because you're an expert at it. Pro West is over here doing those things. I could just send all my parcels to you to be updated. Jeremiah could send his from his county, and we wouldn't have to train people to do parcel mapping.
I'm smiling. Sorry. And I'm saying, Brett, you don't think that's already happened?
Well, I know it's already happening, but
Yeah,
that's where I'm thinking, dang, I want to be editing parcels on my screen porch,
that's already happening. We have found more and more, and we're picking up these clients that that want us to go and edit their parcels in the Parcel Fabric, either with us maintaining the fabric or with them maintaining the Parcel Fabric. And again, one of the benefits of moving into a server-based, a services-based architecture is that in order to go and enable a consultant to go and do this, literally it's nothing more than creating a group and inviting those users to that group and giving that group edit rights. You're done.
Mhm.
All the issues with client server implementations and access to your network, all that's gone. We actually edit their data on their server while we're going and editing it using services, web services. It's, yeah. But also it also means not just consultants, but it also means that let's get really crazy and say, let's say a pandemic hit, right? And everybody had to stay home and they couldn't come into an office. Let's really get crazy here.
That's crazy, man.
I know. It's like science fiction. And so when you've got a service-based resource like that, that means you can actually have people connecting up. If they've got the username and the authorization, they could connect up to that service and edit it over the internet without necessarily going through a VPN, without necessarily going and actually having to get onto your server, only having access to that REST point to be able to go and do it. I can, let's sort of, and I was being somewhat facetious with that, but in fact, that's the way it's happening right now. I can tell you one of the things that's being worked on right now, because it is service-based architecture that we've got. Esri is working it out so that not necessarily parcel mappers, but CAMA systems, all right, listers can go and formulate a request, send it to the REST point, and have the REST point do the mapping. They've already developed, if you actually look at an enterprise implementation, they've already developed all the REST points to do things like merges and splits and all this other thing. What they haven't developed is fully the syntax of that request to make sure that that's right. Merges are easy. They've got those and they demonstrate them all the time. They can be sitting there and it can be a little form. That form can come out of a CAMA system. That form can come out from a lister, anything. It says, take these two parcels, merge them together, and this is going to be the remaining parcel there. Boom. It automatically goes and sends it to the REST point. The REST point says, oh, let's enable the merge service. Let's go and identify those parcels, take those two, merge them together, mark the old ones historic, mark that interim line as historic, and create a new one and date stamp them and run whatever attribute rules that we have on them and be done with it without having a mapper do anything. Just like that. So that's a real possibility. Parcel mappers don't like that, and the saving grace is the fact that almost universally we have kept such horrible records, and the way our land records are, we have everything from patents in the 1850s, the original descriptions coming out that are handwritten, that are not readable by artificial intelligence, to some of the different formats of what's recorded in the public records we've got all this jumble, these different things, so that it's not going to happen in my lifetime, probably not in Chris, my son's lifetime, but you can see that that's where it's going, that you have something recorded of record, and that record is then analyzed and pulled out and said, okay, here's the important information from here. Here's the description, and have the software using AI build that map. Long way off, but that's what the vision is, to be able to go and do this, to simplify the mapping so that it requires less and less intervention by specialists, to let listers do the mapping, to let clerks do the mapping, that sort of thing. I think it's a long way off, but Jeremiah, and quality internet, yeah, it's probably the biggest issue. Jeremiah says, I've had a hard enough time editing stuff on my own county network due to limitations. I agree. So Jeremiah, does Mr. Musk's satellite network solve that problem?
Not if you have a heavy rain or snowstorm.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think there's still issues. Is it terrestrial internet? Is it satellite internet that we're using? Is it 5G? They all have little issues with them. I have counties that are very rural counties here in Florida that we do work with. They can't even use ArcGIS Online unless they take their maps offline, bring them out into their individual vehicles and map it that way. They don't have internet in some of these places. They don't have it. They're so rural. These are primarily timberlands up in the panhandle of Florida. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of areas in the country. We're putting in 5G, but there's areas that still struggle with any type of, whether it's internet, even the very, phone line internet is still only pretty much thing they can hit, unless they're using a cell phone, using a data plan that way, but that's not viable for mapping necessarily.
It's insufficient bandwidth. It's insufficient data plans. So there's still some limitations on here. For us to completely go and do this, but it's it's something to think about, something to dream about. I can say that it has definitely made light years worth of advances from when I started mapping in 1974. I kid around, but the reality is the first map that I ever generated was on a piece of linen, and it had ink, and I used rapidograph pens to write ink on linen. And huge leaps from this. And the biggest leap after that was you could go and have some rubylith, and you could do scribing on the rubylith and use photo reprographic systems to go and create suddenly shades and everything on your maps. And it was like, oh my gosh, where are we going to go now? And then the microcomputers came in, and it's this constant evolution of how can you do it. First it was big mainframe computers, and you had modems interconnecting them up, and then it became microcomputers, and they were disconnected. Then you started recognizing you had to start sharing the data, so you went into client server implementations, and now you're back to using the internet, where you've got big servers and you're trying to connect into these big servers to do the editing on there. It's just trying to figure out what's the best way to go and do all this with our current levels of infrastructure and technology. Can you tell I still get excited about this? I really do. Where do I believe mapping will go next? You know, I think we're sort of stuck on a plateau for a while. As it relates to land records, again, because remember, I'm that platypus. I'm both surveyor and land records and GIS. I think that the problem that Esri has identified is this fact that land records historically have not been very rich in the information it provides. You know, even a survey, you always have to go out and look for other information beyond that survey. A CSM, you can't just map it as standalone, because you have to know where's your starting points, where's your monumentation for the CSM. There's other information you always need, so that it's always pulling in other information. It's always relying upon the quality of this other information as you're pulling in. Whether it's the reference location for where a public land survey system monument is located, which has a big impact on what you do, to, again, the quality of the land records and how it's referencing those building blocks of it. I think I think we're at a plateau. I don't think there's any huge leaps. I think what we're going to find is we're going to find some advances to make that research and finding of these things easier, but I don't think we're going to see huge leaps in quality. I think it's going to be taking the current procedures we have and making them easier to go through. And if by making them easier to go through, it means that you're making them available to more people, that's good. You don't have to have as many specialists. I'm one of those people, and Brett and some others are. We're some of these people that we used to be the high priests of GIS. We were the ones that you had to come to even if you wanted a map, because we were the only ones that knew the 2,600 commands inside of ArcInfo, right? We were the ones that knew ArcPlot and ArcEdit. And so you had to come to us. Well, that's done. They've made the same process, but they've made it more available to everyone else. And I think we're just going to see that expansion as we go through here more and more. It's not going to be that we can think a map and it'll be there. It's just not going to be there. We still have to search for the background information we're going to use, search for the layers, search for the feature classes, whatever terminology you're using. I used to kid that, and my senior project manager we used to joke about this, that Esri was like Reader's Digest. And again, we're really dating ourselves, but Reader's Digest, and that every month they would come out with a list of new words. And those words sometimes meant the same thing as the old words did, but it's just a new way of referencing the same thing. And we see that with each new release of GIS software. What used to be coverages and regions are suddenly called themes inside of ArcView. And then they're called feature classes inside of ArcGIS. And now they're called services and layer files. And it's changing. It's different words associated with that same concept. A data set of some way that can be graphically shown and analyzed. That's all it is. It's the same thing. It goes over and over again. That's one reason why those of us that have been around, we actually can very quickly adapt to the new software, the new way of doing things, because it's the same thing. It hasn't changed that dramatically. You know, the shape file still stores, the shape field still stores the coordinate values to define what the geometry of a single feature is located at. There's been no change in that since coverages. It's still there. It's all, coordinate values on them. And those coordinate values are related to some sort of projection. The way we manage projections, the way we manage, those are the same, but Brett, what do you see? What do you see? Any big changes coming here?
I don't have any comment on that. I do. I haven't looked at Pro that much, or the fabric within Pro, but it does make me laugh when there's this seed that's now inside of this polygon, because if you go back to ArcInfo, every polygon had a point in it before you could make the polygon.
That's exactly right. Yeah, same concept.
So it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
And now we're back to multiple layouts in Pro. ArcView had multiple layouts. It's like, where did the multiple layout go when you hit ArcMap?
Yeah.
And now they're back.
And again, those of us that have been around a while have seen so many of these similarities. The fact of the matter is that geodatabase, it's really nothing more than taking a shapefile and stuffing that shapefile inside of a relational database structure. That's all it is. It has the same tables on here, has an attribute table, has a shape table, it has index tables against it. It's the same thing. It's just, they just call them slightly different. They store them in there a little bit differently, and it's the same concepts. Yeah. So I think it's what has changed is now we're not looking necessarily on the client server networks anymore. We're now looking using internet protocols, and that makes this data available to more people, but there's still issues with it. It's still not invisible. It's still not, to quote Arthur C. Clarke, it's still not magic. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If you know what all these little tricks are, it's not magic yet. And it's going to be a while before it's magical. Boy, that went off in a different area.
All right, though. I was just pondering the fact that despite there being more and more information at people's fingertips, the people still need somebody to understand it. The phone calls are the same in some regards. They have a problem and they need somebody to solve it. Sometimes we can't always solve their problem. It doesn't matter how good the mapping is. It doesn't matter if it's surveyed or not. When two people disagree over the results, it has to go to court. And there is no way for us to resolve that, regardless of how supreme the mapping is. That will never replace that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The data has never moved beyond data. It's never moved up that spectrum from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. It hasn't done that. It's still data. It's still, again, that's the reason why I get excited, because I see that, okay, now we're not dealing just with points and lines and polygons anymore. Now we can start putting some elements in there, some behaviors, some properties, to make sure that these other things are in there. And then maybe we can start moving it onto information. But then we always need somebody to interpret it to make it knowledge. And then somebody to interpret that knowledge to wisdom, to what is right. And we're still really far from that. We're still in data. We have to move it up. Well, this workshop became very philosophical, didn't it? I'm sorry about that.
No, it was great discussion. It's nice to talk about it in this back and forth kind of way, because versus just watching a webinar, because you learn so much more from people's experiences.
Yeah,
so I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And thank you for also, hey, thank you for inviting me and allowing me to do this. I love doing this, and I really miss coming up to Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
But also, thank you for changing what normally would have been just me talking to the screen and giving me some people to talk to and ask questions of, and having them ask me questions, because I think there's real value there. I miss talking to people. I miss seeing people.
Mhm.
And that's a challenge right now in this. And hopefully next year we'll be able to get together again. But until then, we have to do this virtually and try to make the best that we can out of it, and go from there. It's the reason why I always beg, please put your webcams on. Please, let's look at
Yeah,
one another.
it
Yeah,
helps.
yeah, it does.
Thank you for presenting 2 workshops. That's amazing. And then we also have you presenting, I believe it's Wednesday.
Wednesday
although
at
I-
1. At
Wednesday
1
at 1.
noon. Is it 1? Yeah.
1 Central Time.
1 Central Time, which is 2 my time. Yeah.
And Frank, I meant to ask you for fun, what is the temperature translation or in Florida? I had -27 on the way to work this morning.
So Carmen, you really want to do this?
Maybe not.
Do you really want to do this? Okay. Right now, it's 83.
Oh my, wow.
Yeah, it's
It's
83.
been-
I mean, it's partly cloudy, so it's not like it's an ultra sunny day, but it's partly cloudy, but it's 83 degrees. We probably got up to about 85. We've actually been having some heat issues come through. The other day, last Friday, I think we actually hit a record. It got up to 87 down here, which,
Wow.
you know, it's we miss Wisconsin. That was our chance to go and see cold. And that's we would love to go and switch places once in a while.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, hopefully, our fall virtual, or our fall, automatically saying virtual, our fall meeting may still take place in person, we're hoping, but we'll see. And then hopefully, this annual next year, I really hope we can be in
I hope
person
so.
again. It's going to be a great time getting everyone back together.
Yes,
I'm
I
looking
agree.
forward to it.
I agree. And again, thank you for letting me do this. Thank you for questions, and hopefully you learned something. We
Oh,
will
yeah.
be in our booths every day. So please come by and see us, and hopefully you'll stop by for trivia.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sponsoring as well. That's a ton of support. So thank you very much. Yeah, if you are done with the workshop, I can run some kind of end of the day slides. But if you wanted to say anything else, please let me know.
I think that's it. Just again, I want to thank everybody that was here, everybody that participated, and thank WLIA for the opportunity to go and allow me to do this. I love it. Thank you.